I'm Admiral John Christenson, and I'm here because I love the United States Navy and because Paul Henry Carr is a hero to me. The story with Paul Henry Carr and me begins when I was commander of the USS Enterprise Carrier Strike Group, and USS Carr, FFG 52, U.S. Navy Guided Missile Frigate number 52, was one of the ships in the Enterprise Carrier Strike Group. It was a wonderful ship with a great captain, and I had already known the story of Paul Henry Carr. When I was an earlier job in the United States Navy, I was commanding officer of the Surface Warfare Officer School. It's a school in Newport, Rhode Island, where if you're an officer in the United States Navy and you're going to go to sea on a ship and lead sailors, you have to go to this school. And there's 4 basic levels that officers serve at sea: brand new division officers, middle grade department heads, and then you have the second in command, the executive officer, the commanding officer, who's the captain, and then there's actually a 5th level, major commanders. That very first course in there is called the division officer course, and we teach young officers how to lead sailors at sea. It's really their most important job. They have other administrative functions, but really their most important job is leading sailors. And I love the Navy's history. I knew about Paul Henry Carr, and there was a great book written, some of you may have heard of it, called The Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors. And it was my goal to give a copy of that book to every new officer embarking on their naval career at sea. The lawyers came in and said I couldn't buy quite that many books for that many people. So I bought about 50 copies, and when the officers would come to the school, that book would be laying on their desk. I welcomed every class that came to the school personally, and at the kind of the peak of my conversation with these young ensigns, these young officers, I would read the section from Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailor about Paul Henry Carr. And so I'm going to read it to you now. It's just an amazing story. Paul Henry Carr of Chakota, Oklahoma. A Japanese destroyer stood nearby, lobbing the occasional shell into the Samuel B. Roberts' ruined masts. The ship took 4 more hits while the abandoned ship effort was underway. Water was lapping up over the port side of the destroyer escort's fantail when machinist mate 2nd class Charmal Goheen went to check on Paul Henry Carr's gang back in Gun 52. The gun had been silent since the muffled thud of the breech explosion. Where the water hadn't yet reached, the decks were covered with burning oil. Goheen crossed the deck, peered into the gun mount's ripped hatch, and found a horrific scene. Most of the men inside had been obliterated by the blast. They had gotten off 324 rounds of the 325 the ship carried in its after magazine, firing the last 7 or 8 shells without a working gas ejection line to clear the breach, until one of the final rounds got them. Looking into the mount, Goheen discovered where the magazine's last round was. It was right there before him, cradled in the arms of Paul Carr himself. The man was alive, though barely, torn from his neck to his groin. Carr was struggling to hold the shell. He begged Goheen to help him load it into the wrecked breech tray. Goheen took the shell from Carr's arms and laid the gunner's mate on the floor of his mount. Then he took Seaman First Class James Gregory, whose leg had been severed near the hip, and carried him out and set him on the deck. When Goheen returned to the mount, Carr was on his feet again, shell cradled weakly in his arms. Goheen took the shell from Carr again, lifted him, and carried him out to the deck. Paul Henry Carr of Chakota, Oklahoma, proud member of the Future Farmers of America, football and baseball letterman, brother to 8 sisters, the only son of Thomas and Minnie Mae Carr, died there on the deck of his battered, broken warship. And then I say to the young officers, the sailors today are every bit as heroic and willing to sacrifice for their ship, for their shipmates, for their country, as Paul Henry Carr was. Are you up? Do you deserve? Have you earned the honor to lead men like that, men and women? And so Paul Henry Carr's story has always been inspirational to me. I think this book was a very popular book in the United States Navy. It was on our reading list of books that we should read to learn about our history. So he's just a great inspiration to me. Other little stories about Paul Henry Carr that kind of relate to me. He died in October of '44 there on the Samuel B. Roberts. Samuel B. Roberts was named after a Marine who was killed in Guadalcanal early in the war, 1942. They immediately built the Samuel B. Roberts to honor that heroic Marine. Of course, Samuel B. Roberts survived less than a year when she was sunk there in the Battle of Samar. They immediately built another Samuel B. Roberts, and my father's first ship. My father was a poor farm boy from Minnesota. His very first ship in the Navy was the Samuel B. Roberts, the second one. And that's where he met my mother, who was a Navy nurse. So that's why I'm here and why I'm still in the Navy 36 years after I went to the Naval Academy. Interestingly, that Samuel B. Roberts no longer with us, but we still have a Samuel B. Roberts in the United States Navy. It's the third one. It's a guided missile frigate, FFG 58, identical to USS Carr, FFG 52, identical to the ship I commanded, FFG 41. So there's a connection there with the Samuel B. Roberts. Paul Henry Carr died in October of 44, exactly 1 year to the month earlier in October of 1943. My mother's oldest brother, my Uncle Bobby, was killed on a submarine in that same Pacific Ocean. My mother was 12 years old when he died, and that's why she joined the Navy. So October of 43 and 44, Samuel B. Roberts, Paul Henry Carr, Enterprise Strike Group, every ensign in the Navy, at least for the 2 years I was commanding the school, was inspired by that young man. I thank you all for remembering our heroes too, Paul Henry Carr, who gave up so much for his country at a young age and just demonstrated a kind of heroism that's just really unbelievable.